Hello, my AP students. This is Wendy with AP History Help, and this is the AP History Help podcast. It's season 2, and it's our premiere episode. So I'll give you a little preview of what to expect from this season, which happens to follow the school year. But in general, you'll learn everything you need to know about taking AP History, from skills to content, to historical thinking skills, to themes in history. Whether you're taking or thinking about taking AP World History, AP US History, or AP European History, this podcast is for you. Be sure to check out the episode list and the show notes to find the topics that you need help with. AP History Help is on TikTok and Instagram and YouTube, where I am happy to answer your questions. But first, I'm going to talk about what to expect from Season 2. Students, you might remember that Season 1 was focused on the skills, the themes, and the strategies for success in your AP History class. Please, if you're new to our class and or to AP History, look back through those episodes for further information on that side of the courses. Looking ahead, Season 2 will be predominantly content focused. And since I want to cover as much content as possible over the course of the school year and prior to the exams, I'm going to alternate episodes between AP World and AP US History content. And AP European students, unfortunately, that content will come in Season 3 of the podcast. But if you need my help, just send me a message on social media or text or call me to ask questions or even to set up some tutoring sessions. I also have a self-paced AP Euro class available. I'll put a link to that in the show notes. Because the episodes this season are content-based, I would strongly recommend taking notes. There are a lot of ways to do that, but my recommendation is to do so thematically. By that, I mean categorizing the content by social, political, economic, cultural, and technological. Your best bet would be to have a copy of my Student Success Planner available through Amazon or from me by mail. I'll drop the link in the show notes to my website, which gives you the option to buy it either way, or you could go to my TikTok shop and buy it there. Find me at AP History Help, but at the very least, listen with a pen and a piece of paper. Now, on with our topic for today, which is Unit 1 of AP World History. The time period is circa 1200 to circa 1450. Now, quick note on the word circa. It sounds like circle, right? Exactly. It just means around. That the beginning and the end dates are a little flexible to acknowledge that history is not hard and fast, black and white. I've taken to use the phrase ish. For example, Unit 1 ends 1450-ish. Understanding the time period means knowing why those dates are significant. Why does our first time period, which includes the first 2 units, why does it begin in 1200 and end in 1450? This is what we call periodization. I did some research on why 1200 begins this time period. You know, APUSH has such clear-cut dates and years and events in their periods. But this particular date is definitely circa-ish. To be brief, the 1200s was when all parts of Afro-Eurasia knew of each other and were in some form of regular contact. And circa 1450 marks the last years when the Eastern and the Western hemispheres were still disconnected from each other. It was almost the beginning of the Ottomans conquering Constantinople. It was the end of the 100 Years' War between Britain and France, and Spain was at the height of the Reconquista. Developing a good understanding of what defines a period is helpful as it helps you to compare and contrast. It assists in causation, and it allows you to categorize as you look at changes and continuities. In other words, integrate all of those historical thinking skills. Got it? Good. The name of Unit 1 is Global Tapestry. Global is self-explanatory. But what is a tapestry? It's a woven textile with many different colors and has been used to make many different things. Now let's apply that to history. A world weaving of many different colors. Can you picture that? It's the coming together of different people and cultures and ideas and more. The coming together of the world. So Unit 1 takes a look at the different areas of the world and what's going on. The developing cultures and governments and technologies and social classes and more. Which brings me to the key concepts in Unit 1. We have 7 of them. Consider them subtopics of the unit. We start with developments in East Asia, then the world of Islam, then on to South and Southeast Asia, then state building in the Americas and Africa, developments in Europe, and we end with a comparison of the different areas, setting the stage for the next unit, networks of exchange. But don't let me get ahead of myself. Here's where I'm going to teach you some details on each of the key concepts, looking at an essential question and how I would answer it. I don't want to stop every time a historical thinking skill or theme comes up, but I'll emphasize them in context. Also, I'm not going to keep repeating the time period. You and I both know the periodization for this lesson, and I do not have time to teach every single detail. But at the very least, I am including what College Board calls the illustrative examples, the things that you definitely should know. The big picture is that between 1200 and 1450, several large empires emerged around the world. Some were modified revivals of earlier empires in the region. Others represented new developments. All were shaped by the context of regional trade, which had been increasing since around 600. Key Concept 1.1 asks, how did developments in China and the rest of East Asia reflect continuity, innovation, and diversity? We have 3 parts here: governance, culture, and economy. First, a variety of internal and external factors contributed to state formation, expansion, and decline. Governments maintain order through a variety of administrative institutions, policies, and procedures, and governments obtain, retain, and exercise their power in different ways for different purposes. Second, the development of ideas, beliefs, and religions illustrates how groups in society view themselves, and the interactions of societies and their beliefs often have political, social, and cultural implications. And third, as societies develop, they affect and were affected by the ways that they produce, exchange, and consume goods and services. Here are some specific examples. For government maintaining order, we're talking about things like the role of the Song dynasty in China instituting civil service to promote things like meritocracy. This gave educational opportunities to lower class men, as well as the possibility of government jobs. Economically, we see China building up their infrastructure for the Grand Canal, which promoted internal trade. And of course, I must mention the champa rice. It was a fast-growing strain of rice adopted from Vietnam. This allowed for more food, which led to a growth in population. More people meant getting more work done, producing steel and porcelain and silk. China became the world's most commercialized society. Through extensive trade, Buddhism entered China and impacted their belief system, or at least led to more syncretic or blended faiths like Neo-Confucianism. They invented the compass and used paper to make navigational charts, which guided their massive ships called junk ships. What else? They developed gunpowder, which would get traded with nearby trade partners. More on that later. And China was the first to use woodblock printing, though most people didn't know how to read. Just the privileged class. Chinese literacy did spread to high-end Japan and Korea. Key Concept 1.2 asks, how did Islamic states arise and how did major religious systems shape society? We look at culture and government and technology. First, the development of ideas, beliefs, and religions illustrates how groups in society view themselves and the interactions of societies, and their beliefs often have political, social, and cultural implications. Second, a variety of internal and external factors contribute to the state formation, expansion, and decline. Governments maintain order through a variety of administrative institutions, policies, and procedures, and governments obtain, retain, and exercise power in different ways and for different purposes. You've heard that before. And third, human adaptation and innovation have resulted in increased efficiency, comfort, and security. And technological advances have shaped human development and interactions with both intended and unintended consequences. Okay, so this is all about the spread of Islamic civilizations and influence through Afro-Eurasia, right? Culturally, the Muslims played an important role in preserving Greek literature and providing commentaries on Greek philosophy. The Abbasids, they built the House of Wisdom in Baghdad while also spreading scholarly and culturally into Christian Spain. Technologically, we see advances in math and medicine and literature way before the Europeans. As a matter of fact, some of the Islamic knowledge would be shared with or spread to the Europeans because of the Crusades. And last, politically, we see the rise of gunpowder empires. The Seljuk Turks, the Mamelukes in India, and the Ottomans. These were civilizations that traded with China for gunpowder and spread and conquered because they brought guns to sword fights. Key Concept 1.3 asks, how did various beliefs and practices in South and Southeast Asia affect society and the development of states? So the development of ideas and beliefs and religions illustrates how groups in society view themselves in the interactions of societies, and their beliefs often have political, social, and cultural implications. We heard that one before, didn't we? A variety of internal and external factors contribute to state formation. Are you hearing a pattern here? Expansion and decline. Governments maintain order through a variety of administrative institutions, policies, and procedures. And governments obtain, retain, and exercise power in different ways for different purposes. The cultural implications were shown by a blending of religious practices, the Bhakti movement, and Sufism. The Bhaktis were Hindus who, rather than emphasizing studying texts or performing rituals, they focused on developing a strong attachment to a particular deity. The Sufis were Muslims who did missionary work in Southeast Asia, and because of their tolerance for local faith and traditions, many people felt comfortable converting to Islam. In both of these cases, they are examples of adapting the faith to the people around it in order to either fit in or win over converts. Notice the historical thinking skill of comparison there, the similarities and the differences of the Bhaktis and the Sufis. Now, politically, we see a whole bunch of empires emerge, most of which are really hard to pronounce. I'll give examples that I'm able to say, like Srivijaya, Rajput, Khmer, and Majapahit. The Khmer Empire, otherwise known as the Angkor Kingdom, which would be modern-day Cambodia, there was a mixture of Hinduism and Buddhism, which can be seen at the Angkor Wat Temple. Angkor's success has been debated, but it's believed that the kingdom's sophisticated irrigation and drainage systems led to great economic prosperity. Irrigation allowed farmers to harvest rice crops several times a year and help control the impact of the heavy monsoon rains. The Srivijaya kingdom controlled the shipping hub from the Indian Ocean through China, and its navy prospered by charging fees for ships traveling on those sea routes. The Majapahit kingdom, based on the island of Java, had 98 tributary relationships at its height. They sustained power and wealth by controlling sea trade. Key Concept 1.4 asks, what states developed in the Americas and how did they change over time? So, a variety of internal and external factors contributed to their state formation, same as before. Expansion, decline, maintaining order through administrative institutions and policies and procedures for different purposes. So some specific examples are the Mayans, the Mexica or Aztecs, and the Incas. The Mayans are outside of our time period, but they're included as an illustrative example by the College Board. So they were organized into about 40 city-states, each run by a king. Women did rule there when there was no male heir available. They rarely fought to control territory. More often, they fought for tribute. The Aztecs built their capital in a swamp in what is modern-day Mexico City. They also had city-states, but the city-states were grouped into provinces. And what they're best known for is human sacrifice as part of their religious beliefs, as well as developing a 365-day calendar. And the Incas were an empire on the west coast of South America in modern-day Chile and Peru. They were divided into 4 provinces, but all answered to the Inca, or king. The Incas adapted to their environment by terrace or steppe farming, and they built extensive roads and bridges throughout the Andes Mountains. They used a labor tax called a mita, M-I-T-A, which required that men give their labor to help build the infrastructure. They had no written language, but kept records on knotted strings called quipu. Both the Incas and the Aztecs would be conquered by the Spanish in the early 1500s, which is covered in Unit 4. 1.5 asks, how and why did states develop in Africa and change over time? A variety of internal and external factors contributed to state formation. Yeah, you know the drill. In Africa, as in Eurasia and the Americas, state systems demonstrated continuity, innovation, and diversity, and they expanded in scope and in reach. For example, in current-day Nigeria, the Hausa ethnic group formed 7 states. States were loosely connected through kinship ties. There was no central authority. City-states were established on specialty, and while landlocked, they benefited from the trans-Saharan trade routes, which became much more prolific once the camel saddle was developed. And let me point out the importance of gold and salt trade to West Africa. They got rich, like really rich. The wealthiest man ever in history was Mansa Musa, who was the leader of the Mongol Empire. Someday I'll probably do an episode just on him, but I do recommend looking him up. He was more than just some rich guy. Anyway, Great Zimbabwe was located in East Africa, and their architecture demonstrated the growing wealth of the kingdom. By the 9th century, they had begun to construct Zimbabwes, which was the Bantu word for dwellings, out of stone. and Great Zimbabwe became the most powerful East African kingdom between the 12th and the 15th century. Whereas the Hausa Kingdom relied on trans-Saharan trade, Great Zimbabwe relied on Indian Ocean trade. The last African example is Ethiopia. I really like talking about them because they remind me of that game, which one of these things is not like the other. Ethiopia, or Aksum, was isolated, and where other kingdoms were adopting Islam, they practiced Christianity. They built 12 rock churches, all carved out of stone, that are still there today. Now remember to keep Ethiopia in the back of your head, because they're going to follow a different path than much of Africa as we progress through history. And 1.6 asks, how did the beliefs and practices of the predominant religions, agricultural practices, and political decentralization affect Europe from 1220 to 1450? Now, we've already covered the thematic focus for culture and government, social interaction, and organization, however, is the process by which societies group their members and the norms that govern the interaction between these groups and between individuals, and how they influence political, economic, and cultural institutions and organization. Got that? So here are some examples for all three themes. Politically, we are looking largely at feudalism and its demise due to various causes. This was a lovely system of mutual obligation that kept people and land protected from invaders like the Vikings. It was perfect at a time when most of Europe was decentralized. It kept everyone safe, and everyone knew their job. This would end as monarchs gained power in land. The plague sent a lot of the serfs into the cities, seeking jobs, and the Crusades would send many knights off to distant lands. So we see the growth of English and French monarchies and the power held by the Catholic Church. A number of innovations and ideas would greatly change life in Europe, including agricultural innovations like the three-field system, the cooperation of the Hanseatic League, and the invention of the printing press. And just to give you an idea of what society was like in Europe, Muslims faced discrimination in Europe. And in 1492, the Spanish king also expelled the remaining Muslims who would not convert to Christianity. In the more urbanized areas, women lost their rights. Some women were allowed into guilds, but very few. And men thought less education was necessary for women. Speaking of education, scholarship was almost entirely in the hands of the church and its clergy, as they didn't allow for medical research because they believed that sin was the cause of illness. Yeah, so when the plague hit, that is why many believed it was caused by bad people. Remember earlier when I said the Muslims were more advanced in medicine? This is a good comparison as to why. The difference in how each faith viewed education and medicine. I could continue with Europe, the Renaissance, the 100 Years' War, the Byzantines, but that is covered in much more detail in AP Euro. I do recommend it if you'd like to learn more about these topics. Our last key concept asks, in what ways was the process of state building in various parts of the world between 1200 and 1400 similar and different? So state formation and development demonstrated continuity, innovation, and diversity in various regions. Really, this is a summary of Unit 1, comparing the different state formations as demonstrated by continuity, innovation, and diversity. As the Abbasid Caliphate fragmented, new Islamic political entities emerged, most of which were dominated by Turkic people. These states demonstrated continuity, innovation, and diversity. Empires and states in Afro-Eurasia and the Americas demonstrated continuity, innovation, and diversity in the 13th century. This included Song Dynasty of China, which utilized traditional methods of Confucianism and an imperial bureaucracy to maintain and justify its rule. State formation and development demonstrated continuity, innovation, and diversity, including the new Hindu and Buddhist states that emerged in South and Southeast Asia. In the Americas, as in Afro-Eurasia, state systems demonstrated continuity, innovation, and diversity, and expanded in scope and reach. And in Africa, as in Eurasia and the Americas, state systems demonstrated, you guessed it, continuity, innovation, and diversity, and expanded in scope and reach. Whew, that was a lot. But in a nutshell, that is Unit 1, the Global Tapestry. To summarize, between 1200 and 1450, between circa 1200 and circa 1450, several large empires emerged around the world. Some were modified revivals of earlier empires in the region. Others represented new developments. All were shaped by the context of regional trade, which had been increasing since around the year 600. And all had cultural, social, and political implications. Next episode, which will be released in 2 weeks on August 26th, will be Unit 1 for a push. But just 2 weeks after that, on September 9th, you will be ready for Unit 2. Same time period, but looking specifically at those networks of exchange or trade. In the meantime, review and practice the content. If you haven't already, get that student success planner from my website or TikTok shop. Head on over to my website and go to Unit 1 for AP World History. I will have links to practice questions of all types for you, as well as links to videos, articles, and some review games, all for Unit 1. When you're on my website, you'll see there are a bunch of ways to contact me. Feel free to do so with any questions you might have. I am here to help you. And that will do it for this episode. Don't forget to come back to Wendy for AP History Help. And this episode of the AP History Help podcast is now history.